Oliphant. He's the Deputy Director General, Labour Policy and Industrial Relations. Without any delays, I would let the Minister speak to you. She called you here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chwete, Program Director. Firstly, let me say good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The reason why we have called this press briefing is just to brief you about the progress in terms of the national minimum wage. As we all aware, the genesis of the national minimum wage started in 2014 in the ANC election manifesto, where it states, and I quote, investigate the modality for the introduction of a national minimum wage as one of the key mechanisms to reduce income inequality, take steps to strengthen existing laws to ensure faster change in employment equity in all workplaces by enforcing an accelerated implementation of employment equity targets, enforce measures to eliminate abusive work practices in atypical work and labor broking, close quotes. On the 17th of June 2014, the immediate past President of the Republic, President Zuma, in his State of the Nation address following the national general elections said, and I quote, given the impact of the untenable labor relations environment on the economy is critical for social partners to meet and deliberate on the violent nature and duration of the strike. The social partners will also need to deliberate on wage inequality. On our side as government, we will during this term investigate the possibility of a national minimum wage as one of the key mechanisms to reduce the income inequality. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa then will convene the social partners dialogue within the ambit of NEDLEC, close quotes. Indeed, on the 4th of November 2014, a labor relations indaba was convened under the auspices of the National Economic Development and Labor Council, known as NEDLEC, to set in motion the process of engagement on examining the modalities of introducing a national minimum wage in South Africa. The labor relations indaba gave birth to the Ekurhuleni Declaration, where constituencies acknowledge the challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality facing South Africa and the economy. Flowing from the declaration, a technical task team on labor relations was mandated to engage on the following issues: promotion of employment, labor market stability, including capping protracted and violence in strikes, collective bargaining and the role of the state, employment vulnerability and social protection. The second technical task team on wage inequality was mandated to focus on addressing and engaging on the national minimum wages. April 2015 saw the beginning of engagement on the work of the LRTTT and WITTT reporting to the Committee of Principals, and the Committee of Principals was consisting of organized labor, organized business, community and government led by the Deputy President then, and the whole process was foregrounded on strong research and international best practice around the concept of a national minimum wage. By and large, the engagements were evidence-driven, with a careful eye on finding the delicate balance in order to manage any unintended consequences that may arise. Parallel to the processes, Parliament commenced its own investigations on the modalities of introducing a national minimum wage in South Africa. We know that Parliament process took the form of workshops and consultations with the general public countrywide. During the period from December 2016 to February 2017, intensive engagement by social partners ensued, and this culminated into an agreement in February 2017. The agreement in question was signed by social partners, and the advisory panel, which was set up to examine the second phase of work on the minimum hours of work, completed its assignment in June 2017. The introduction of the national minimum wage, including enforcement, the bills before Parliament proposed that the national minimum wage be set at 20 rand per hour and be reviewed annually. It is important to note that the national minimum wage is a floor below which no worker can be paid, and this includes workers that are covered by the sectoral determinations as well as collective bargaining agreements. On these sectoral determinations, we talk about those sectoral determinations that are less than the current proposed national minimum wage, including the collective bargaining agreements as well. However, the minimum wages for domestic and farm workers will initially be set at 15 Rand and 18 Rand an hour respectively. This will be adjusted to reach the national minimum wage within 2 years of implementation. The National Minimum Wage Commission will be set up to also review the national minimum wage on an annual basis, taking into consideration the inflation and other labor market and socio-economic conditions. On labor market stability measures, the agreement at NEDLAC contains a code of good practice on collective bargaining, industrial action, and picketing. This code provides practical guidance on collective bargaining, the resolution of disputes of mutual interest, the resort to peaceful industrial action and picketing processes. The Accord on Collective Bargaining and Industrial Action commits social partners to take all steps necessary to prevent violence, intimidation, and damage to property. It also seeks to improve the capacity of the social partners and other agencies to resolve disputes peacefully and expeditiously. The Labor Relations Amendment Bill and the Basic Conditions of Employment Bill contains amendments that are consequential to the National Minimum Wage Bill and the agreed code on stabilizing the labor relations environment in South Africa. The National Minimum Wage Bill, together with the Labor Relations Amendment Bill and the Basic Conditions of Employment Amendments Bill, were referred by Cabinet to Parliament in 2017, November. On the 22nd of November 2017, the Speaker of the National Assembly referred the bills to the Portfolio Committee on Labour for consideration. Let me further explain why it was submitted to Parliament in November. The process at NEDLAC finalized the processes in October, and then thereafter it was referred to Cabinet for approval to be sent to submitted to Parliament. The Portfolio Committee has drawn up its own program on how to consider the bills, including conducting their own public hearings. The process is now entirely in the hands of Parliament. On the implementation date, we know that these bills, like any matter that has to do with labor relations in South Africa, deal with the highly contested policy propositions. We are therefore not surprised by the enthusiasm that the public hearings have generated. We, however, take comfort from the fact that these bills have passed the social and economic impact analysis test, and we have no doubt that they will also pass the constitutional scrutiny. We are aware that interested parties have been making submissions on these bills, and it has become apparent that the ambition for the National Minimum Wage Bill to become law by 1 May 2018 may not be practical given the high volumes of the public submissions, both written and oral. We are also aware of a number of important issues that are being raised in these public hearings, which Parliament will have to consider as part of concluding the bills. We stand ready to take instructions from the parliamentary process. At this stage, you must all accept and allow the parliamentary processes to unfold without any undue interference. All the bills are now under the authority of Parliament, and those who have views and opinions on the bills will have to approach Parliament, as we, the executive, no longer have control of these processes. When it comes to parliamentary processes, and also while I'm saying it won't be possible to implement the national minimum wage on the 1st of May, on conclusion of the current public hearings by Parliament, the committee will consider the submissions, both written and oral, and based on the oral submissions also that have been submitted to Parliament, the department is expected to respond on the issues that have been raised by those who have submitted to Parliament. And then the parliamentary process also, they have to revisit the bills with a view to factor in any changes or any amendments where they deem appropriate, and deliberate on the revised bills with a view to find convergence, including engaging the bills on a line-by-line basis. Vote on the bills in preparations to submit to the National Assembly and the NSOP respectively. Everything being equal, the bills are then sent to the President for sign-off. It is for these reasons that the observation coming out of the current processes is that it may not be possible to conclude all these processes in time for the implementation on 1 May 2018 as initially envisaged. You will know, however, that the 1st of May implementation ambition has always been subjected to the completion of the parliamentary processes. But at the same time, I want to say that after the President has signed it off, we have also to deal with the regulations in terms of the implementation, and then also request the President to promulgate the legislation for implementation. The national minimum wage legislation marks an important new milestone in the history of labor relations in South Africa. Therefore, we want to follow all due processes diligently, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for the presentation. We'll now take questions. We'll start with with Cape Town, and then we'll go to Pretoria. 4 questions in Cape Town. You'll introduce yourself and the media organization, the usual. Linda and yourself. The 4th one, or 3 questions?
Minister, good evening. Linda Ensel from Business Day. I'm just a bit confused because you say at one stage it might not be possible, and then I think if I heard you correctly, you said it won't be possible. So if you could just clarify, is it definitely not going to be possible? Thanks a lot.
Hi, good evening, Marianne Merton from the Daily Maverick. Would the Minister perhaps take us into confidence of her conversations with President Ramaphosa directly or with representatives of the presidency following the intervention of COSATU directly to Ramaphosa, pointing out that it will not be possible to pass these laws in time for 1 May 2018 implementation. Given your briefing, is the department or yourself as minister perhaps taking any responsibility for some of the changes in the bill that are not reflective of the NEDLAC agreement? The NEDLAC agreement signed on the 8th of February 2017 does not abolish sectoral determinations, which considering still govern the majority of workers, even if there would be a national minimum wage. For example, the bill does not reflect the NEDLAC agreement that the wage minimum wage of 20 rand an hour will be applicable for farm workers and domestic workers from 2020. That's quite clearly stated in the NEDLAC agreement. It's not in the bill. And then I just also wanted a comment of whether something may have gone awry in the writing of the statement. When you say you will know, however, that the 1 May 2018 implementation ambition has always been subject to the completion of the parliamentary process. That is not what the NEDLAC agreement says, which says very clearly that subject to all sorts of processes, the implementation date will be, quote, no later than 1 May 2018. Thank you.
Minister Jan Lang from Report newspaper, you mentioned in the statement that there are a number of important issues that were raised in the public hearings over the last week or so. Can you, in your views, give us an idea, examples of what are these issues that led to this delay that you are announcing? It seems you are announcing a delay tonight. And secondly, domestic workers and agriculture will be exempt, but significant numbers of collective bargaining agreements and sectors are below the current wage, way below. For instance, clothing and textile workers or something. I think their wage is around 12 or 13 rand. It's going to have a significant impact in that sector, which is a dying sector. Will there be more exemptions other than agriculture and domestic workers?
Thank you very much. On the issue of the implementation on the 1st of May, if you recall, before we raised the issue that the intention is to implement the national minimum wage on the 1st of May, depending on the finalization of the legislation. I raised that at NEDLAC, even when they were still processing these bills, because I indicated that if they don't finish the bills by the end of September, it won't be possible for Parliament to finalize the legislation before the end of the financial year, of which, therefore, it may delay the implementation. So the constituencies at NEDLAC were aware of that, and we said, but we will wait for the processing of the legislation by Parliament. So looking at the situation right now, it seems as if it's not going to be possible. It won't be possible, precisely because, one, National Assembly has not finalized the process. Before they finalize the process, then it won't be possible to implement it. Because after the National Assembly has finalized the processes in that house, then they will refer the legislation to the National Council of Provinces. And also the National Council of Provinces will have its own program to process the legislation. That's why I'm saying it's out of us as the executive, because we don't have a control of parliamentary processes. As you are aware that there is a separation of powers. Parliament will have their own program and processes. But I must say we have briefed both the Portfolio Committee and the Select Committee on these particular bills. But the National Assembly, the National Council of Provinces can't deal with the processes while the National Assembly has not finalized its processes. And the reason also why I'm saying that it won't be possible, as you well aware, I think tomorrow is the last day of the sitting in the National Assembly, and the next sitting will be towards the end of April. And therefore, if you look at that, if it's on the last week of April, then the 1st May will be the following week. So the NSOP then won't be able to deal with that particular, with those particular processes. On the issues that don't reflect on the NEDLAC agreement, we were talking about the issues of the domestic workers and the farm workers. In terms of the issues, it says domestic workers will be paid at 75% of the national minimum wage and 90% of the farm workers on the national minimum wage. So here I was highlighting the exact amount, because if you calculate 75% of the national minimum wage, it will be 15 rand per hour for the domestic workers and 18 rands per hour for farm workers. So it doesn't reflect as that figure, but in terms of the percentage, it is reflecting on the agreement of the NEDLAC. And on the issues that relate to the questions that have been raised in the Portfolio Committee, the Director General and Mr. Mkhalip, they will respond on those other issues because they are part and parcel of observing the processes in Parliament. Director General.
Thank you, Minister, and good evening to everyone. I think it is now clear that given the submissions that people are making, and you would know that from the very beginning of the process that the Portfolio Committee has undertaken, there was a dire need for more time. People wanted to be heard, and the chairperson decided that it's important that people are heard and more time is allocated to the interested parties. And I'm sure that those who are watching the process, you'll also remember that a representative of the DA also raised the issue of time, that they needed to also quiz the people who were doing the presentations and making submissions. So it is on those bases that we're talking about their delay. And then, of course, there are a number of other issues that we will have to respond to as a Department of Labour on Wednesday. And those relate to the question that was posed regarding issues that do not reflect the outcome of NEDLAC, issues relating to the definition of a worker, that in the bill is the definition has been taken directly from the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, which does not take into totality what the definition of a worker is. So those are the things that we have to deal with as a Department of Labour. But you will also understand that it has taken quite a long time for the NEDLAC to conclude this work. And that's why we find ourselves where we are. And the discussions were necessary because we wanted to make sure that we take everybody along in this process. I don't know if you can do it.
Just on the issue of the NEDLAC agreement on the 2 years. I mean, if you read the new NEDLAC agreements, it's clear that in terms of the domestic and the farm workers, they should meet the whatever the national minimum wage is in 2 years' time, bearing in mind that the national minimum wage will be reviewed every year. But that is dependent on the research that the Commission will need to do. There is, in the agreement, if you look at that agreement, is that the Commission will need to do research to check what has been the effect of this national minimum wage. If that research tells us, that's what the agreement says, NEDLAC agreement. Therefore, you can't put in legislation that it was agreed in NEDLEC that that's what's agreed on and that's what captured, that's what we need to do. Now, you can't say in legislation that it's 18 rand now, in 2 years it's going to be whatever the national minimum wage is at that stage, because you don't know what it's going to be if it's reviewed. And then say that depends on research that is done. You just can't put that in the legislation. And that's an agreement. That issue was raised at NEDLEC. It was agreed with all the parties at NEDLEC that that's not what we're going to be writing at NEDLEC, but it will reflect on the NEDLEC agreement so that all of us can make sure that we do that. On the issue of wages which are below the national minimum wage, the issue that they're raising, 46% of workers in this country earn below the national minimum wage, and below 20 rand as we speak. Therefore, it's not only about bargaining council and the agreement. There's a number of employers who, when the national minimum wage comes into play, will have to look on their wage structure and meet the law. If they are not able to meet that, the minister has indicated that as soon as these processes are finalized, we've got to publish regulation that deal with issues of exemptions. Now, in terms of the law is clear. You either pay the minimum wage or you apply for exemption. If you are granted exemption, then you won't be paying the minimum wage. You have to justify why you're not. Therefore, any employer or whether you are in the bargaining council, whether you are in an employer that cannot afford, you are obliged to pay the minimum wage or apply for exemption. If granted, then you will pay the amount that is granted.
Directly with the President or a representative of the President with regards to SABC intervention last week? It wasn't answered.
Thank you very much. I have verbally briefed the President on the matter. That is not going to be possible to implement the national minimum wage. And I verbally briefed him on Friday based on the follow-up that I made with the acting chairperson of the Labour Portfolio Committee. Thank you very much.
I mean, on the issues that you say were left out in the agreement, you're raising the issues of the SDs. The issue of the SDs are part of the legislation. There's no doubt that there was no agreement on the issue. Now, there's nothing that says that if you look at the legislation, at the NEDLEC agreement, there's no agreement that says we agree as NEDLEC party. The NEDLEC agreement is drafted in terms of areas of disagreement, areas of agreement. And areas of agreement are reflected. The only area that is not reflected, as the teacher has indicated, is the issue of the worker, the definition of the worker. Everything else that is in the NEDLEC agreement is reflected in the bill. Now, in terms of the NEDLEC protocol, if there are areas of disagreement that have not been agreed, parties, NEDLEC parties, can come to Parliament, as they've done, and raise those issues that they have not agreed on the NEDLEC. As a government party also, we are entitled to draft bills, even on those areas where there's no agreement. But in the areas where there's agreement, the bill must reflect what was agreed. In the areas of no agreement, because the NEDLEC Act reflects them, it does not mean that we cannot draft bill reflecting that, because NEDLEC constituencies have got a right in terms of the protocol to come and lobby Parliament on those areas that they do not agree with the bill with. That's how the NEDLEC process works. There's a written protocol on that determines what is expected of the parties on those areas. What is not expected is for parties at NEDLEC, including us, to come to Parliament and raise areas that have been recorded as agreed. If an area is agreed at NEDLEC, you do not expect a party to come and re-raise the same issues that were agreed, are reflected agreed at NEDLEC agreement. But if it's not agreed, it's free for all. Any party can raise it. That's how it works.
May we go to Pretoria?
One, there's been a lot of criticism as far as the bill is concerned, the proposed bill, especially especially from sectors like the NUM, where they're saying that, you know, part of the section there of the proposed bill limits the workers' rights to strike. And I just wanted to ask the minister if in any way that was considered to say maybe perhaps we should remove this clause which says workers need to vote in secret or before they can embark on a strike, because it's knowing South Africa and what we deal with in terms of strike, that could cause some major problems in some sectors.
You said which sector? NUMSA?
Yes, it's NUM.
Any other questions, Pretoria?
That's all for now, Mr. Judge.
Thank you.
I think we need to explain this issue of the amendment that we're making and the right to strike. In the law as it is now, without any changes, not considering the bill, the law requires that the constitution of the unions must have a provision that deal with balloting. That's what the law says. It says you can't go on strike without having done a ballot. Therefore, we're not introducing anything. That's a requirement of the law. As we speak, it requires that you ballot. What the amendments are doing, they are explaining what a ballot means. Now, when the law says you must ballot, there's a difference between a vote and a ballot. If the law says you must vote, then you can do it by show of hands because it's a vote. We can vote here whether we must continue with this press conference by show of hands. But when the law says you must ballot, the word ballot presupposes three things. One, that the ballot that you do must be secret. The decision that you make as an individual in a ballot, in any ballot, is secret. Two, it's democratic. And that's what the bill is saying. It's not introducing anything new. It's just saying that the ballot that the law talks about must be secret. Now, nothing prevents a strike in that. In many countries, the fact that you've balloted and you've received through a secret ballot 90% support of workers to go on strike on its own is a mobilizing tool for workers without going on strike, when they can go to the employer and say, well, we've had the secret ballot, we voted, we have 90% support. But the issue that I'm raising is that nothing in the law interferes with the right to strike, because the law as it is now talks to a ballot. It says workers, before going to strike, they must follow their constitution. Their constitution must make clear what are the steps, how the ballot is going to take place. And these amendments now are explaining that one of the tenets of a ballot is secrecy. And we don't think there's anybody here in this room, especially in this room, who will disagree with us that when you talk about a ballot, we're going to have a ballot. It means there's a ballot paper somehow, there will be a question that is asked, and it's going to be secret and democratic. That's what the ballot is all about. If you look at the Oxford Dictionary, that's what it's going to tell you. If you Google the word ballot, the explanation is going to tell you that. That's how it is.
This is the second round of questions. We have two hands.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Lindsay Dentlinger, Eyewitness News. I know you say the process now firmly lies in Parliament's hands, but given that you've already spoken to the chairperson of the committee and you know how the processes here work, can you give us some indication of when, is there a new date? Have you, maybe in your discussions with the President, has he given some type of indication of, given that, how you know how parliamentary processes unfold, is there a time somewhere down the road that you're looking at to revise this 1st of May deadline? Thanks.
Thank you. It's really just a quick clarification, and I just want to make absolutely sure that I understand. NEDLAC reached an agreement on the 8th of February. Further negotiations at NEDLAC were delayed, even though the minister informed the partners that you need to finish by September, otherwise there'll be a problem. By November, there was still no agreement at NEDLAC on the sectoral determination, so the department decided that in the national minimum wage bill, it will introduce the abolition of sectoral determination, because it's the department's right to legislate as it wishes. There must have been, I think there may have been a misunderstanding. It wasn't a question with regards to the rands and cents figures for the farm workers and domestic workers. I think that's pretty much clear, and the bill is in line with the NEDLAC agreement. The NEDLAC agreement does talk about bringing farm workers and domestic workers into the national wage bill by 2020. That was also the announcement that Cyril Ramaphosa, who was then deputy president, made. So my question is, who misinformed the then deputy president? Thank you.
Let me just explain the last part. I think Mr. Mkalipi explained it. That the process, during the discussions, it was agreed that the national minimum wage will have tiers, especially for domestic workers and farm workers. And that after 2 years, because it's going to be introduced in 2018, so 2020 will be 2 years after the introduction of the national minimum wage. So in 2020, the National Minimum Wage Commission will then bring the wages of the farm workers and the domestic workers in line with the national minimum wage. I think that was the agreement. That's why Mr. Mkalipi is referring to 2 years after the implementation of the national minimum wage. So we did not write 2020 in the law, and we could not have written 2020 in the law. But the work of the National Minimum Wage Commission will include that work because it's in the agreement. So when we set up the structure, it will take into account that. Now, I don't know whether the question was directed to the minister with regards to the timeline, but I think the minister indicated earlier on that the parliamentary process is out of our hands. We don't have a date now as to exactly when will the process be finalized and when will be the implementation date for the national minimum wage. We're hoping that the process will be concluded soon. We'll be very worried if it goes that far. We're hoping that it will take a month or 2 months after May, maybe 1 month or two. We're hoping, and really it's out of our hands. We do not have, a department doesn't have powers to, put pressure on the portfolio committee to finish this. They have to follow the due processes.
The NEDLAC agreement on the 2 years, it says based on research. That's what the NEDLAC, it's not guaranteed. If you read the NEDLAC agreement, it says that there's got to be a research assessment, basically, on what was the effect of what we've agreed on the sector. That's what it says. Now, if you put in law and say in the law that the national minimum wage for domestic and farms in 2 years is going to be the same, then the research is done. The research says something different. Must we go and amend the law? You understand the issue that we're raising? Because if you read that, that's what the report says. It allowed the issue of a research. Therefore, if the equalization is dependent on the research, then you can't put in the law that in 2 years' time is going to be equal when you do not know what the research says. That's the problem. Now, those that say that we have not captured the Network Agreement, how do you capture a decision like that and say in law that in 2 years' time is going to be equal based on research? Do you put that? Do you say it's going to be equal? Do you put based on research? What happens if the research tell you otherwise? See, that's the problem that we're raising. And that's the explanation that it's not an omission at all. It was agreed by all parties that that's what must be recorded in the Network Agreement. And we need to make sure that it does take place, the research does take place, and the decision is taken by the Network constituencies on the basis of that research, what we need to do. It's not guarantees. Read the Network report properly.
On the issue that talks about the new date for the implementation, we have not reviewed the date. As we have said, the implementation will depend on the finalization of the legislation. I think even if Parliament has finalized the legislation itself, it will be sent to the President for assent, and then thereafter, I must just confirm that as we speak, NEDLAC has finalized the regulations based on the current proposed legislation. But they will wait whether there are going to be any amendments during the parliamentary process, and then they will review the regulations. After finalizing those regulations, we will then request the President to promulgate the implementation based on the regulations. That's how the process unfolds. Even Parliament can finalize it, but we can't implement it without the assent and the promulgation by the President. So that will be guided then by the promulgation that will be given to us by the President. On the issues of, I want to add on the issues of the domestic and farm workers. In terms of the 75% and 95% that was agreed upon, is based on the national minimum wage amount. Said it should be 75% and 90% of the national minimum wage, with the intention that after 2 years, based on the recommendation by the National Minimum Wage Commission, when they are doing the review, then there will be changes. But our intention is to say both farm workers and domestic workers, they must also be part of having the same amount that will be paid in terms of the national minimum wage. I hope that is clarifying your concern. I think also what the other people that are raising now, in terms of the figures in particular, because in terms of the figures, NEDLAC has agreed, and that's why they have signed that particular agreement. They have to wait and present those issues to the Commission when they are reviewing the amount that should be paid in terms of the figures. When it comes to the issues of secret ballot, I also want to add on that one, that in terms of the current legislation, as they have said, the DG and Mkhaliphi, the issue of balloting is there. And in terms of the trade union constitutions, those clauses are part and parcel of the trade unions' constitutions. And we have said those that don't have those clauses, they have to amend their constitutions during their conferences. And that will be followed up by the registrar. So it's not a new issue of the balloting when it comes to the Labor Relations Act. And I think also when they are saying there is a reversal that is taking out the powers of workers to strike, it's not true. And unfortunately, they were not part and parcel of the federations that are participating at NEDLEC. But I must confirm that Mr. Mkhaliphi was invited to address the Central Committee of NUMSA. And he mentioned all these issues because they requested us to brief them as they were not part of the processes. Thank you very much.
Jolene van Wyk, Landbou Weekblad magazine. I just want to find out about the exemption process. Will there be, this time around, a better exemption process? Maybe like an online system equal to that of, let's say, SAR, where employers can... where businesses can apply for exemption. And also, last time there was a huge problem with employers waiting a very long time to hear back from the department if they were exempted from yeah. But so this time around, will there be maybe like a time span, maybe like a month or 2 months, and if you don't hear, then you can just assume that you now exempted, or what will be done to just to better those processes?
Thank you very much. On the issue of exemption, there will be a committee that will be specifically dealing with the exemptions. And as long as the employers are submitting the correct document that supports their request for exemption, the process will be faster. But if they don't support all the relevant documents, because even previously that's what has delayed the finalization of the exemptions. For example, when I can make what we need currently, when you apply for exemption, one, you must submit the financials for 2 years, and also you must submit a report that indicates how are you going to deal with the with the issues that relates to the to say how are you going to make sure that your company in future will be able to continue paying the workers. And 3, that you must also submit the list where the workers will sign that you have agreed with them on how you are going to pay them back, because it doesn't mean that when we give you the exemption, then you will never pay that particular amount to the workers. You must have an arrangement with the workers on how you are going to pay back the money for the workers so that they can be on the equal footing like anybody else. So as soon as they submit everything on time, the process will be faster. Thank you very much.
But
Pretoria?
Just to add to the Minister, there's a system that we're currently busy with, so it will not be a manual process. It won't be a manual process this time around. It will be a online system.
Okay, Pretoria, do you have anyone there?
No, we don't have any further questions, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up. But beyond this press conference, the Minister, the Director General are available to engage you on these issues. And I do think that this is not the last time we're talking about these issues. Our doors are open. You just need to give me a shout. The Minister will talk to you. The DG will talk to you. And on behalf of the Minister and the DG and the senior management, we thank you, ladies and gentlemen.